Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Text 70. Chitena hridayang chaitya kshetragya pravishadhyata virat tadaiva purusha salilad udatishthatha. However, when the inner controller, the deity presiding over consciousness, entered the heart with reason, at that very moment the cosmic being arose from the causal waters. Text 71. Yatha prasuptang purushang pranindriya manodhyaha prabhavanti vinayena nothapayitum ojasa. Translation: when a man is sleeping, all his material assets, namely the vital energy, the senses for recording knowledge, the senses for working, the mind and the intelligence cannot arouse him. He can be aroused only when the Supersoul helps him. Purport: the explanation of Sankhya philosophy is described here in detail in the sense that the Virata Purusha, or the universal form of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, is the original source of all the various sense organs and their presiding deities. The relationship between the Virat Purusha and the presiding deities, or the living entities, is so intricate that simply by exercising the sense organs, which are related to their presiding deities, the Virata Purush cannot be aroused. It is not possible to arouse the Virata Purush or to link with the Supreme Person, Absolute Personality of Godhead by material activities. Only by devotional service and detachment can one perform the process of linking with the Absolute. This description of the Virata Purush is not easy to understand for those of us who are raised in modern scientific consciousness, which means all of us present here today. It's not just a matter of the description, but it's the culture that goes with it also. Just like the other day in San Diego in California, Dhanavir Maharaj was talking about Freud's fraud. And in the course of his discussion, he mentioned the term psychosis. Then I made a comment that the very term psychosis, we just presume that there is such a thing as psychosis according to the description given by the mundane scientists, but it's just their concept of a certain state of consciousness, which if it doesn't correspond to that which is given by the Vedic acharyas, is more or less their mental speculation. But we just take it for granted that there is such a thing because, or what they call psychosis is a valid analysis. We just take it for granted because we're so much steeped in this modern miseducation. But for persons who are raised in this culture of Vedic knowledge, it's much easier for them to understand and accept these points. Just like on Monday in Los Angeles, the verse which I was lecturing on gave an analogy of the pure consciousness of a pure devotee, which may not always be apparent, becomes apparent, and the analogy given by Narad Muni is that of Rahu, which is the planet Rahu, which is not always apparent but which becomes visible when it goes in front of the moon or the sun. Now this analogy is, the point of giving an analogy, as I explained there, is to make a difficult or a concept which may not be very easily understandable by comparing it to something which has similar properties, which is easily understandable within our experience. So the analogy of Rahu covering the moon or the sun, from our perspective, is, or not covering, it's actually, according to the Vedic version, swallowing, actually swallowing. So that was given as an example because it's easy for people in the Vedic culture to understand this, but for us to understand it, we need another analogy to understand that. So that analogy would not be very useful in the modern context. But it just shows that what for us may be a very difficult concept to grasp at all is just accepted as just like any other. There are so many analogies given. The frog in the well. It's easy for us to understand. Of course, most people in big cities like Tokyo have never seen a well, or maybe not even seen a frog except on their dinner table. Not jumping on the table, but jumping into the mouth of the unfortunate persons who like to eat such things. But still the analogy, it's very easy to understand. Or the analogy of the actually many of the analogies given in the Shastra, they're not really valid in the modern age because of the modern way of life negates the validity of them, just like the common example of the sun rising. It's given by Lord Krishna in Bhagavad-gita. When the sun rises, then everything becomes visible. So similarly, when transcendental knowledge arises within the heart, then everything becomes revealed within the heart to that person who is self-realized. But nowadays, the sun doesn't make any difference whether it's day or night. There's neon lights everywhere, and still shining even now. That's mismanagement, as Srila Prabhupada pointed out. There's a big neon light on this side of the building, and you should have turned it off by now. But I guess there was a time when in Japan they didn't care about wasting a few million yen here and there every day on the lighting, but still it's wastage. Anyway, the point is that this Virata Purush is not very easy to understand. Srila Prabhupada, in his purports here, without getting very deeply into trying to help us to understand all the intricacies of this, he brings it to the actual point, which is that Srila Prabhupada writes that it is not possible to arouse the Virata Purush or to link with the Supreme Absolute Personality of Godhead by material activities. Only by devotional service and detachment can one perform the process of linking with the Absolute, which is the point which is made directly in the next verse itself, that Krishna cannot be understood by any material means. So even to understand the Virat Purush, who is described as the form of the Lord which is imagined within material nature. So even that which is that form, well, the Virat Purush is described like that, and also sometimes here in this particular description is described as the actually the very form of the Lord himself directly. So whichever way it's taken, one cannot understand this simply by the Sankhya method, or literally Sankhya means counting, so simply by counting or simply by analysis one cannot understand Krishna. There has to be bhakti, there has to be detachment from this material world. Then one can begin to see things as they are. It's not. There are two kinds of Sankhya philosophy which are very similar. The one is the Sankhya philosophy of Devahuti Putra Kapila, the Supreme Lord, in which he analyzes everything. He gives an analysis of material nature and gives the conclusion that behind material nature, the source of material nature, the controller of material nature, and the very goal of those within material nature is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Whereas the Nirishva Kapila, he doesn't accept that there's any ultimate supreme controller. He's an atheist. So although the two philosophies are very similar, but the conclusion is quite different, and the result of being a mundane scientist is that one gets an opportunity to study all the various species of life firsthand. In other words, he becomes a dog, a frog, a cat, a butterfly, and everything else, instead of just having to analyze them. He has first-hand experience of what it means to be in these bodies. And the result of following the process given by the Supreme Lord, the actual Sankhya philosophy, the complete and perfect Sankhya philosophy, is that one can get out of this material nature and not have to take birth as a butterfly, a rat, a cat, or a chimpanzee, or anything else within this material world, which is a much better prospect if anyone's a little bit actually intelligent. And that's the problem with the non-devotees. Although they're very intelligent in many ways, Japanese people are supposed to be very intelligent in many ways, but they're damn stupid in the most important way, which is not to condemn Japanese people. They're not the only people who are damn stupid. It's also the Chinese and the Koreans and the Americans and the British and everyone else, because everyone is trying to be happy in this material world, which is a stupid thing to do. So to apply one's intelligence to do something stupid is stupid, however intelligent it may be. So that is the condition in the material world, and the devotees, although they may not appear to be very intelligent or organized or together, as the saying goes, but they are the most intelligent because they've understood what the actual purpose of life is. And although they may or may not be very materially competent, whether or not one is materially competent is not a measure of one's devotional advancement. But even if they're not materially competent, that is no hindrance in their march toward the kingdom of God, because advancement in Krishna consciousness does not depend on anything material. Rather, it depends upon one's complete absorption in spiritual knowledge and devotional service to Krishna. So this is the point that Srila Prabhupada is emphasizing here, which is actually the only reason for studying the material world at all. There's no real need to study it, to study the various species of butterflies and the various energies that are acting, but there's no need to understand it. Of course, we can say there's a temporal need. That, for instance, if one has to go from Tokyo to Osaka, it would be useful to understand something about the various means of going. If one has no idea how to go, then it would be useful to consult a timetable of a train or whatever. That's usually the way to go, isn't it? By train. People usually go by train, is it? So if one is completely without knowledge, of course if one is so completely without knowledge he has no idea to go, he probably wouldn't be going anyway. That's maybe too simple an example. But if one has to do something, just like someone is asked to please make some chapatis, and have no idea how to make chapati. They may have seen chapatis, but what is a chapati? How to make it? Well, it seems simple, but actually one has to be taught personally how to do it. You can't do it just from a recipe book. You'll get it wrong. So it's a material art how to make chapatis, unless it's done for Krishna. That's the whole point. But it requires some training to do that. So while living in this world, there are certain things that we need to know, but to concentrate on the material world as if it's the only thing that's worth knowing, when in fact it's only peripherally worth knowing at all, is the mistake of materialists. And that's why they're called materialists, because they're interested in this material world, and they think that this material world is all in all, and this is the place to be happy and Any obstacles in our happiness, well, we have to do some research to overcome that. One major obstacle is death, and they didn't get any closer to solving the problem of death than than they were 2,000 years ago or 3,000 years ago. They may delay it, or they may apparently stop death by various causes, just like they're trying to find a cure for AIDS, and the idea is that people who get AIDS won't die from that, but they'll die from something else. So it's a major problem facing everyone. What is the major problem in the world today? Someone would say George Bush Jr. Other people would say it's the terrible economic crisis that is threatening the whole world. And others might say it's my wife or my husband, but that's not the whole world. They may consider it the biggest problem in their life. But actually the biggest problem is death. And concomitant is that with disease, old age, and if we think, well, anyway when I die then I can rest in peace forever, well, hard luck, that's not true either, because you have to get born again and suffer all over again. So the real problems facing everyone in this world are not an economic crisis or even pollution, that's not the worst problem, or even the political machinations of various nasty people who occupy the seats of power in the world. The real problems are birth, death, old age and disease, and the background of that problem is forgetting Krishna. Materialistic people have sworn not to accept this because they are rascals, but actually the fact is, if we are to get free from the suffering in this material world, we have to surrender to Krishna. And Krishna cannot be approached by any mundane means. We won't find him in our microscope, however powerful we make it, and we won't find him in our telescope, however powerful we make it. We won't find him by experimentation. We won't find him by any degree of sophistication in mathematical formulae. Krishna can be understood only by the process of devotional service, and that is the purport of actual Sankhya philosophy, which Srila Prabhupada is very kindly presenting herein. Hare Krishna. Is there any question about this, please? Sorry, was I speaking a little fast there for all the non-English speakers? Anyway, the conclusion is chant Hare Krishna and surrender to Krishna. That is the conclusion. Any questions, comments, protests? There won't be any protests because no one comes here at this time of the morning if they're a materialist. They must be a devotee. So, anything to say? Alright, yeah, alright then we'll say Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, and finish there. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Srimad